Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. For those of you that have just joined, if you could possibly turn your mics on mute, that would be wonderful. Also, to let you know that we will be recording this webinar this morning, and we're going to then publish it on our website. So the webinar this morning is about our follow-up report on the Spotlight on Noise Complaints, Time to be Heard. And in this report, we summarise our evaluation of our Spotlight on Noise complaints, which we originally published in October 2022. So without further ado, I will hand over to Zoe to introduce herself and kick off the presentation. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you, Victoria. Yes, so I'm Zoe Miller. I'm one of our insight and systemic managers at the Housing Ombudsman, and part of what we do is the Spotlight reports and then the subsequent follow-up reports as well. So just want to start by saying a bit about the evaluation process. We do evaluate each Spotlight report and produce a follow-up report. And the focus on these are around good news stories, successful initiatives, sharing learning with the sector. And we ask a deliberately open-ended question when we carry out the evaluation, because we want to know what areas landlords have chosen to focus on. So when we contacted landlords, the question was, what changes have you made or intend to make as a result of the report and the recommendation? So very open-ended. And the purpose is we then want to produce a very practical report with lots of examples, because we're often asked for examples of what good looks like. And so we want to share that with everybody. And in terms of this evaluation, we contacted over 400 landlords. So we contacted all the landlords who'd attended the initial noise report webinar. We then looked at the current MAL rate as well and cross-referenced this with landlords who had featured in the initial report. So that gave us an additional 5 landlords where we had concerns about an increase in their noise maladministration rate. For the first time, we also ran a follow-up session with landlords to ask them for feedback on changes that they've made as a result of the Spotlight. And we did that because we're always looking to evolve our approach, and we recognise that not everybody wants to respond to an evaluation by email, and some people would prefer a more interactive format. In terms of the response rate, we had 55 landlords responded to our email requests, and a further 56 landlords attended the evaluation feedback session. And whilst this initially appears a low response rate, we have shown you here what that represents in terms of figures regarding households. And I would also say that responses that we did receive were very detailed and of a high quality, which enabled us to write this report. So when started to analyse the responses, we're looking for themes and trends in what landlords told us. And overwhelmingly, the main thing that came from that analysis was about policy changes. And we emphasised in our original Spotlight report the issue or potential issue around conflating noise and ASB, and we made recommendations around that, and said and advised landlords to have separate policy for noise. So as you can see, we have a really good response rate in terms of that, both in terms of separate policy for noise, reviewing existing policies and procedures, and also introducing a good neighbourhood management policy. And only 4% of landlords told us they hadn't made any changes as a result, which was also encouraging. 60% of landlords told us they'd self-assessed against the recommendations and shared this with us as well, and showed us how they'd used the recommendations and their action plan, and what their focus had been on. And we could see from these responses and the self-assessments that a lot of the key messages from the report had been acted on. In terms of further policy changes, Landlords told us about introducing timescales for responding to noise complaints, so ensuring that these are monitored and that they form the basis of any service level agreements with third parties. We'll talk about language a bit more, but there was a shift in language and approach in terms of mediation. So some landlords told us about saying that it's about conversation and not confrontation, because sometimes mediation is seen as being a confronting process rather than it being beneficial to both parties. And landlords also told us about triaging noise complaints to ascertain whether they fall under household noise or ASB. In the original Spotlight report, we encouraged landlords to focus more on preventative actions, and this included making better use of the void standard to help reduce noise concerns for incoming residents. So we're very reassured that a third of landlords told us that they'd made changes regarding the void standard and that they were also seeing the benefits of these changes, such as a reduction in noise complaints. Some of the examples of effective changes that landlords told us about included reviewing previous reports of noise from the property and conducting noise insulation checks. We were also told about installation of soft door closer mechanisms, door pads, anti-vibration washing machine mats, which we made recommendations about leaving carpets and curtains and furniture in to help with noise transference, and making floor repairs to reduce noise transference and including thicker acoustic matting where that was appropriate. And just to add here as well, it was one of the things that came up from this was that landlords had told us that they'd identified that not all of the costs had to be borne by them and that they had identified various grants and sources of funding to pay for some of these measures as well. We were also told quite a lot about practice changes as in addition to policy. And one of the main themes around this was about language, approach, and communication. And again, that reflects the recommendations that we'd made in the original Spotlight report. 29% of landlords told us they'd made changes as a result of the recommendations around this. And these changes included staff training, the shift in terminology. So, for example, not using the term perpetrator and incidents for non-ASB issues, reviewing current communications in collaboration with resident focus groups, and having targeted focus groups with tenants who've actually experienced noise nuisance to understand their experience. We were also told about adopting reflective practice approach in staff one-to-one meetings and reviewing standard letters to ensure the tone contains no perceived dismissive tone, bias or accusatory language. And what was particularly reassuring about this feedback was that these are all in line with the tone and the key messaging of our recent Spotlight report on attitudes, rights and respect. And one of the main things that came out from the language approach and communication aspect was that there's greater awareness of the impact of the noise on and the risk to the individual rather than solely looking at just the type of noise. So a lot more work being done around taking everyday noise more seriously. And although we didn't specifically ask about this because of the open-ended nature of the questions, some landlords did speak about considering reasonable adjustments in their approach to noise complaints, such as noise cancelling headphones and home visits. And we have an audio case study that Victoria is going to play now, just to highlight some of these points in action.
Spotlight on Noise Follow-up Report Case Study. Sensitive handling of noise and proportionate use of resources. Louise reported noise from her radiators. The landlord attended to inspect them and found no issues. Later that month, Louise reported that the communal lift was making a loud noise. The maintenance company responsible for the lift attended, and although they found no faults, they did switch off a fan that may have been generating noise. Louise reported further noise issues later in the same month and said the noise was coming from the boiler room. She also raised a formal complaint that the noise situation was not being managed appropriately. The landlord attended again and checked the heating system and Louise's radiators. No noise or defects were detected. The landlord responded to Louise's complaint and said that although it was satisfied with the actions it had taken, it would continue to monitor the situation. It also provided details of Louise's housing officer as a point of contact. Louise remained dissatisfied with the noise, and the landlord's head of property compliance visited the property with a mechanical engineer. They inspected the lift and the boiler room. No faults were detected. The landlord offered Louise its guest flat. Louise attempted to sleep there, but felt the noise was actually worse in the guest flat, so she returned to her home. The landlord checked to see whether any residents had complained about the noise. No other complaints had been made. Louise continued to complain about the noise, and so the landlord completed a resident risk assessment that recorded that the noise had been reported as still present, but all checks had been done without any indication of faults. What happened when the complaint came to the Housing Ombudsman Service? We found no maladministration. The landlord had responded to Louise's individual concerns and continued to monitor and carry out checks, even after initial checks indicated there were no faults at the property. The landlord did not try and diminish Louise's experience, and instead offered her the use of its guest flat in order to try and provide her with some respite from the situation. This approach showed it considered Louise's well-being.
Thank you, Victoria. So further practice changes that we have identified as part of the evaluation, and these are around knowledge and information management. The original Spotlight report makes 3 knowledge and information management recommendations about retention and processing of data, documenting decisions, and aligning databases. 22% of landlords told us that they've made changes to their systems and processes, and a further 2% told us that they plan to make changes. Some examples of those changes. We have examples of new noise transference case categories, so to produce data that highlights particular buildings to identify those repeat cases, which then leads to a strategy to minimise noise. Some landlords told us about development of new business intelligent dashboards to help identify any noise hotspots. Introduction of quality check process before closing any noise cases to ensure the process and policy have been followed and that all the correct documentation or records are on the system. Again, landlords told us that they were already seeing the benefits of those changes. And then practice changes regarding multi-agency working. 20% of landlords told us about the improvements and success in this area. And some examples of that include information sharing protocols. And so some of the information shared include relevant medical information and risks to enable landlords to review nominations and sensitively let properties. There's examples of having a representative from local healthcare services on the ASB case review panel. One landlord told us about a joint pilot with Mind, the mental health charity, and they were carrying out joint visits at the earliest opportunity where that was identified as a concern to prevent escalation. There's a lot around signposting and in some cases paying for memberships to join local mental health groups. And then in terms of the recommendations where we didn't have a particularly high level of engagement, 16% of landlords said that they'd increased the presence on their estates or had increased home visits. And this was very much something that landlords want to do more of, but told us about the pressures and the resource demands. So some landlords are trying to circumvent this by using data and insights so that they can then target areas where an increased staff presence would be most beneficial. And some landlords also told us about giving housing officers smaller patches, thereby making it easier or potentially making it easier to attend in person. We also didn't receive any specific response to our recommendation around considering the impact of applications on the wider community, although that was indirectly touched on in other responses. And just a bit about the further resources that are currently available. Victoria, you can probably say a bit more about what's coming as well, but we do have a noise complaints key topics page where we have the frequently asked questions, we have landlord guidance, residents guidance. We will be doing a podcast, and there are some case studies as well, including case studies around no maladministration. And explaining what the learning is from those no maladministration cases.
Yeah, so if you go to the Centre for Learning tab on the website, it's just up there. We've got all these resources. We're adding to them all the time. So we've got a podcast coming out, which Zoe and I are going to be talking about noise on, and we're going to have an e-learning and some virtual classrooms as well. So do keep your eyes peeled. And keep your eyes on that Centre for Learning tab, because we're updating stuff all the time. So Zoe, is this how to contact you?
Yes, that's just a bit of detail about the team, and people contact you us directly through the Insight at Housing Ombudsman address. So we do monitor that inbox.
Lovely. So at the beginning of the session, apologies for those that have joined late and didn't hear me say this, feel free to add your questions for Zoe into the meeting chat, or if you're happy to, feel free to raise your hands and we'll come round in order of those who've raised their hands. So it's over to Q&A now. It's over to you guys. This is the awkward moments where we wait for people to raise their hand.
Just out of interest, have you had any feedback from tenants, residents to the Spotlight report, and directly, I mean, and if so, I just wondered what their response was.
So the original Spotlight report always goes through our resident panel before being published. So the initial resident feedback was with the substantive report. We don't do that for the evaluation follow-up. That doesn't go through the resident panel. We gather feedback throughout the year through the Meet the Ombudsman events and sort of collate that, and noise and ASB is a recurring theme that does come up. And so that's what we've done in terms of resident consultation. The follow-up report itself is more us going out to landlords and asking them what's working for them, and so that we can share that. So we haven't done anything resident specific around that, but the original noise report also included field work, which included meeting with residents as well to understand more about their experience of noise and ASB.
Okay, thank you. Just wondered as well, just following on from that, whether in your research and your endeavours, which I think is excellent actually, was just whether kind of you were getting any sort of different or specific information around specific client groups. So for example, you know, my organisation is specifically older people. I guess there are organisations out there that are specialist organisations dealing with particular client groups. I just wondered, I can see how your approach is very relevant to mainstream or general needs housing providers. I just wondered whether there's any learning for specialist providers dealing with specific client groups, just out of interest.
Yeah, so it's touched on a bit in terms of when we mentioned about the joint pilot project with Mind, for example. So one of the things that was coming across quite strongly in the evaluation was more about needs, particularly around mental health and other conditions such as neurodiversity and subsequent noise sensitivity as well. So although we didn't specifically target supported housing, for example, as part of the evaluation, some of the responses that we got did show us that you do need to have regard for those individual circumstances for different client groups, and that's one of the other reasons why it's so positive to see landlords telling us about reasonable adjustments and looking at noise, not just in terms of impact on the individual, but also whether there's any vulnerabilities or health conditions that also need to be taken into consideration.
Thank you. I'll shut up now if you like.
No, it's fine.
I think so. Christine has just popped into the chat. She's happy to share Mount Green's GNP and our neighbourhood's toolkit, which my neighbourhood officers are finding very useful. Thank you, Christine. That would be great. I don't know if you've got a link to it. If you could pop it in the meeting chat. If not, feel free to email it to us, and we can get that sent round to the attendees at the session today. Does that work, Christine?
Yes, I'll put it in the chat. Thanks.
Oh, amazing. Thank you. And Rachel's added to the chat as well. It would be good to see what the separate policy for noise looks like. Any good practice as well would be good to see. So there is that good practice example, isn't there, in the report, and some poor practice example as well. But as we find those and we get those case studies, we'll publish them by the Centre for Learning.
Yeah, and what I would say, what we are seeing in terms of good practice with handling of noise, it's all the things we've just touched on in terms of looking at the impact on the individual and taking into account those individual circumstances, and not just looking at it in terms of, well, doesn't meet a certain threshold for noise, therefore it's going to be treated less seriously, because it is about looking at that impact, because noise can affect people differently.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you for your comments in the chat there. I can't see any more raised hands or any more comments in the meeting chat. Is there any other questions for Zoe?
Questions or comments on what you would find helpful from follow-up reports in general, because this is the second time we've done this now, and we always look to improve each one that we do, and the next one will be on the KIM, the Knowledge and Information Spotlight report. So if anyone wants to add any comments or ask anything about what they would find really helpful with that would be good. Oh, thank you, Christine.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks, Christine. So for those of you who haven't just seen the chat, Christine's kindly posted the good neighbourhood management policy there for Mount Green, and also the good neighbourhood toolkit as well for Mount Green. So thank you very much, Christine. Right, any other questions before we wrap up? I think everybody's gone quiet now, Zoe. Stun them into silence. Oh, Richard. Is it?
No, sorry, that was a mistake. Sorry.
So you're keeping us all entertained on this Q&A session, Richard. Right then, if there's no further questions, thank you very much, Zoe, for the presentation today. We are recording this and we'll get this up on the website as well. So if you've got any colleagues who haven't managed to join today and they would like to watch back the webinar, then they can do via our website. So give us a few days to do that. And yes, thank you everybody for attending. I'll stay on the line until you've all gone, just in case you think of anything as you leave. But thank you very much for your time today.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thanks.